Reddit store owners, what tricks do you use to get customers to spend more money? I'll start with something I noticed at Best Buy. I was in Best Buy looking at the televisions when I noticed the cheaper models were on non-HD channels, while the larger, more expensive televisions were on HD channels, making the unaware customers lean more towards spending the extra $100. They even gave me a hard time when I asked to see the cheaper TV on an HD channel. I got them to change it. I purchased the TV because of course it looked amazing on HD, but when I walked by that same section later, it was back on the non-HD channel. I own a coffee and ice cream store in a small village. Here is how I boost sales. 1. I work really hard to remember the names of my customers. 2. Our coffee is awesome, so good that baristas from Starbucks will have coffee at our place. 3. I talk to the customers. Everyone wants to feel that they are part of a community. For some people, a surprisingly high number, a trip to the coffee shop to socialize is an important part of their human contact for the day. 4. I give back to the community. I built and donated an ice rink last winter. I run awesome contests for the baseball leagues. 5. We have lots of really tasty products. Lots of free bite-sized samples. Our ice cream is awesome. 6. I love owning the shop, and I hire great people who are generally happy to be working there. 7. I respond to Yelp feedback and Facebook often. Every 5-star matters to me. I was able to get some 4-star people to come back and give us a second chance. Now I have 8 5-star ratings. It's important to me to have nothing less than a perfect score. 8. Our prices. Anchoring. During the presentation we'd always say we had 3 programs. Average, aggressive, and conservative, and always in that order. The average program would be just at the edge of what they could afford, the aggressive would be way out of their price range, and the conservative program would be what we're actually going to try and sell them on. That way it doesn't sound like this product costs $8,000. Cash or check? Instead they think, well, we obviously can't afford the aggressive program, and the average is a bit much, but the conservative program is much more affordable. Let's do that one. My uncle works for a software company in Tokyo, and he once told me about how they tend to quote peculiar prices for their services. For instance, he once had a contract that ended up coming to around the $300,000 mark, and his partner suggested quoting $295,000 to make it seem cheaper. My uncle instead quoted for $304,000 and won the tender. Apparently the not rounded out or 99 cents Q figure makes it seem like a company is charging what it costs for a service, not just some arbitrary figure. When I worked at Costco, I discovered that the reason we put big ticket items, especially TVs, right at the entrance to the store, was to activate a reward response in the customers. They'd look at the TVs, but quickly realize they weren't going to buy them. I can't remember the exact mechanism, but basically by not buying a big ticket item, the customer would be subconsciously convinced they could reward themselves by buying larger quantities of regular items. I worked in a restaurant while attending college that would add extra salt to their bar items, and would make hot entrees and apps additionally spicy during peak bar hours. The idea here was to manipulate the customer into purchasing more alcohol. Anyone who has ever been a bartender will tell you that one of the highest profit return pours comes from draft beer, especially the mass-produced shit from macro breweries like Budweiser or Miller Lite. My bar manager had it down to a pretty specific system, where he figured that with hourly wages for a bartender, plus all additional costs associated with paying for the beer and taking into account its loss cost from a bad pour or too much head, each draft beer from the big brewers cost around 25 cents to pour. When you're selling that 25-cent beer for $3 to people who are drinking more of it to account for more salt and hotter foods, the turnover was actually pretty impressive. When he took over and instituted these rules, because the owner knew duck all about how to maximize profits in a bar setting, the profit for the place skyrocketed. We'd have people who would previously have a beer or two drinking 4 and 5, along with their meal. Tips got larger, tickets got bigger, and customers didn't have the faintest clue as to why they were all of a sudden spending more money. After ordering a DSLR from an online retailer that seemed to offer a great price, I got a phone call from a salesman confirming my order. Of course, he wanted to add some high markup items like UV filters and third-party batteries to my order. He stated that if I only used the battery that came with the camera, it would last 20 minutes. When I refused, he threatened that if I didn't order the add-ons, he wouldn't sell me the camera. He ended up not selling anything, and I got it for a normal price from a reputable store. TLDR, some online camera stores are really shady. Mattresses. Nearly every retailer can advertise, find the same product for less and we'll take 25% off. Why? Because the manufacturer gives every major retailer their own specifically named lines. So nobody but say, Sears, sells Pillow Soft 2x Serta, even though Nordstrom's Sleep King 3x Serta is exactly the same thing, with exactly the same specs, but with a different name and fabric pattern. Some grocery stores use smaller floor tiles on the areas with more expensive products. As you push your cart around, you hear more clicks as it passes over the tiles more frequently. This unconsciously makes you think you are going faster, and you slow down and spend more time in the expensive areas. I'll go ahead and challenge this. For starters, I've never seen a grocery store that organizes by price, it's always by product type. Price usually only comes into play as high margin goods are placed at our level. Beyond that, most stores use linoleum with flat tiles, which lead to no or completely minimal noise. Either way, the average person isn't going to hear it over the din of the store, or the shaking of the cart itself. A friend of my girlfriend runs a pretty popular deli eatery in Auckland, New Zealand. They're famous for their pies, which are made fresh right there every day. After being open for around 6 months, they noticed that the worst selling pie was the Mexican one. They always had at least 2 or 3 left over at the end of the day. So, for no other reason than a social experiment to see how easy people were to influence, he renamed the pie the Lady Gaga. Exactly the same ingredients, same location on the menu and the pie rack, just a different name. The Lady Gaga pie now sells out first, every single day. They rarely have any left by 1 PM, let alone by the time they close. He told me that when people come there for the first time, the pie they usually have is invariably the Lady Gaga. Even though I'm a pretty cynical person and love to whine about groupthink and lowest common denominator stuff, this was still hugely surprising to me. I work for a grocery store, but I am not in any way in charge of these things. When you enter, you are in produce. All the fresh fruit and vegetables laid out and arranged to send you past the deli and into the bakery. That is where you encounter all the smells of the freshly baked bread and cookies. Then you are at the fresh seafood and meat counters, and only then do you get into the less appealing grocery items. You need to walk by all the fresh things before you get to the packaged goods. The milk is in one corner of the store, the bread in the other, and the cash on the other side. You would not believe how many people I have seen at the cash who said they were just in for bread and milk, and wound up with a whole cart full of things that they had to walk past to get at the things they wanted. Children's cereal is placed next to the end of the aisle, where it is easily seen while walking past. Encourages children to ask for it, because they will see it even if their parents don't turn down that aisle. Likewise, chocolate marketed to adults in on the higher shelves, about 5 feet off the ground, while that marketed to children is on the lower shelves. I managed a nightclub for about 2 years before I left my hometown to move closer to university. One of the things we used to do was turn off the AC to heat the place up. People packing the dance floor would start to get really hot and decide to cool off by buying another drink. On a slightly unrelated note but still interesting, it was a common practice to give any customer who complained at the bar what they wanted. This was because at the crowded bar the goal was to get out drinks as fast as you can. Our target was 1 drink 20 seconds at peak times. If someone came up to you and wanted to argue with you about a mistake that was made, you could easily be standing there arguing for 5 minutes. In the end, We lost less by giving away free drinks than by arguing our point. Edit. The same points seem to be getting brought up again and again, so I will address them here. 1. Yes, turning up the AC did endanger the patrons. No, we weren't worried about lawsuits. Australians aren't particularly litigious. 2. Turning up the AC was probably illegal, as was exceeding the maximum occupancy by up to 300 people. The security beating patrons bloody out of sight of cameras, getting people blind drunk and ripping them off, dealing ecstasy and multiple sound violations. The owners didn't care. As I mentioned below in one of the comments, the club was owned by bikies up to and including the first year that I worked there. The owners were similarly unpleasant people concerned only with making money. 3. I've also mentioned this one below as well. There were only 2 clubs in town, both owned by the same people. Because of this we could easily cope with the poor reputation of the club. For every person who couldn't take the heat and the noise, there was always 3 more waiting to get in. Used to work at a pet store. Dog breed and where the customer got their dog played a key role in sales. If the customer tells you they got it at a shelter, help them. Be frugal as possible by pointing out sales and the discounted vaccinations we had every weekend. They'll keep coming back thinking what a deal they're getting despite everything being much more expensive than other stores. If the customer purchased their dog, especially any expensive breed, we push the more expensive items. Male customers who were pit bull owners, or dogs of a similar breed, bulldogs, boxers, etc., were the easiest to sway, and were always willing to spend more money on food. Tell them their dog's fur will be shiny, and they will gain muscle mass. Sold. Female customers were easier to sell grooming services to. It was insanely easy to figure out how much a person would be willing to pay after a 15-second exchange.